And it's a notion that changes as you move through time and space. So maybe we can all enter into the same frame when we say community. What are we speaking of?
First of all, one can see that the fort itself is not in the middle of the town. The fort is quite away from the sea, and the major settlement is actually quite a long way away from the fort. In the sort of bay area, there are some buildings that are made of coral and are two-story structures, but most of the buildings are arish or khema, as people have called it, made of palm frond. And that tells us a lot about the community as well, because first of all, people lived in family communities, and very often that was obvious through the architecture as well, in that you would have a compound which inside had more than one nuclear family. The community is structured by its being a community of tribally defined people. An inner fort, an inner building, where the round tower is the oldest, as we know. It was first seen from the sea in 1761, so it must have been built before 1761. In 1793, the leading sheikh of the Abu Falah, one of the Baniyas, important Baniyas tribes, decided to move to Abu Dhabi, built himself and for his family a fort, and then later we come to see pictures with people and interaction with the outer fort, which we should really call a palace, because the outer place was no longer built in a way of defensive tower, or it was really for the family of Sheikh Shahbud and his family to live in this place as a ruler, to project some greater importance. Importance also means that it was a seat of government, and the seat of government vis-a-vis the community, and communities always need jurisdiction. In the community, you have strife, you have problems, and you need someone who adjudicates. And that in that time still was the thing. The ruler was chief judge as well, along with other important people in individual families and sheikhs of the individual sub-tribes and so on. So the ruler in this fort was never the only judge in town. The topic of my talk was also to find out or to show that this fort was a place which was then visited, because, as I said earlier, it projected importance. And people who came to visit to Abu Dhabi would automatically go to the fort. And there's in fact one story where many years later, one of the oil company representatives actually came to visit, and he came by boat from Dubai, and as he landed, and he went to the fort, and he was told, join the other visitors. And he was dumbfounded. There couldn't have been other visitors. There's no car, no nothing. And he got inside and he realized that there were two British sailors inside who had somewhere further off gone ashore to have a swim. And some of the retainers of the fort saw them there and thought, they're visitors. They have to see the sheikh. They have to. At first they thought they were arrested. And then they realized they were welcomed and given gaffa and dates and so on. And then Ron Cowdery actually joined them, and he could explain, also because these people couldn't speak any Arabic, he could explain. But anyway, my point is that when you come to the town as an outsider, you immediately have to also pay respect to the ruler. That is expected. Now, coming back to the incumbent in this fort, Sheikh Shahbud, as a young man, he had seen all this boom. Then came the 30s. Then came the First World War. But the 1930s, people from outside came and wanted to ask him for concessions to explore possibility of finding oil. Now, Sheikh Shahbud must have heard in the 30s about the fact that in other parts of the Middle East, namely in Iraq and on the border between Iraq and Iran, oil had been found. And so it wasn't strange for him that people came and wanted to look at Abu Dhabi in this light. How and when did they get concessions for looking for oil? It took a very long time. In the first instance, in the early 1930s, Haji Williamson managed to get an agreement that just for 2 or 3 years, I think, and not a firm agreement, but just in particular, so that the oil companies could send down and be allowed to send geologists. That was very important, because first they have to see the geology and the countryside, and so these geologists first made for try to look at the mountains and did not really interest themselves very much in the desert, because where oil had been found elsewhere in the Middle East, it was where there was surface evidence of a dome and certainly mountain evidence. And as I said, Haji Williamson managed to get provisionally agreements. So in 1939, Sheikh Shahbud signed an agreement for 75 years. Now, to think that getting into the generation of your great-grandchildren, more or less, and who would nowadays make, commercial or economic agreements for 75 years? That was quite interesting. But in those days, apparently all the oil company agreements were in that order. Now, to get back maybe to Sheikh Shahbud, in the light of what I said earlier about the pearling industry's boom and its very steep decline, I think one can maybe try to get into the mind of someone who is, after all, one of the very few people in town who can read and write comfortably and knows what's going on in the world by listening to the radio and so on. So leading people who knew very, very little about the world and couldn't really read much about it and didn't have radios, or very few of them had radios. So the responsibility of using the money that then came in after, first of all, after the concession agreements, there were some annual payments, and then eventually after 1960, when the oil company declared that there was oil produced in commercial quantities and money was now going to come in. Many people expected that now we have money. Where's our hospital? Where are our schools? Where are our roads? Where's everything? First of all, it takes a lot of time to do this. There was no cement even. The cement came in bags from Kenya. So, to build anything was needed a long time to get it even started. But also, Sheikh Shahbud was very wise in that he had seen how the development had gone in other parts of the Gulf, and he realized that where oil had been found earlier, and so to speak, the good life had started earlier and had actually, in many cases, duped the leaders, and many projects were then being built that should not have been built for the price that was paid and so on. And Sheikh Shahbud realized that maybe the money that Abu Dhabi gets now from the oil is not for the lasting. is maybe it's much today, maybe it's more tomorrow, next year. But who can guarantee me that the rest of the world actually wants to use this oil for driving around or flying around? How about this nuclear power that you would have heard about in the radio? Maybe the world is actually going over to, like they abandoned the pearls, they will now abandon the oil, and they will actually maybe build all their energy on nuclear power.
I think also Frauke, the turning of the tides, him being a witness of a drastic turn of tides, is always underplayed when we think about what he must have been using, as a frame of mind to make decisions. But exactly. I also heard, or I know, or read somewhere, that he also used the proceeds from that concession to find a way to put it back into infrastructure, the water pipe.
Of course. That is, that's also, the sort of, that in hindsight it was too difficult to sort of separate everything. But in fact, the most important thing that the inhabitants of Abu Dhabi needed was water. And the water pipeline from the water well field from just outside Al-Ain was was finished in 1965. So water was coming in streams and flood. People could go and fill whatever containers they had with water. And that was already such an important milestone. But also the Magda Bridge, the bridge to the mainland, that you don't have to wait, not even just causeway, but that company also built 2 schools, one in Al-Ain and one in Abu Dhabi. I think it's a very nice photograph of how the ruler and the community really depended on each other and need each other and want each other.